All right. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here on this beautiful Tuesday in May for our launch of the Boston Teachers Union collection here at UMass Boston. Folks on Zoom, can you hear me okay? Excellent. And I'm pretty loud in the room. I think you all can hear me. We're especially grateful you all are here. It's a very busy time of year. We know that the Boston Teachers Union is about to go into bargaining with the city. So thank you all for being here as much as you're able. We also know that the libraries are in the midst of searching for a new dean. So for everyone who's been able to make the time, we're grateful. And we also know we're missing some folks who are integral to the project. And you know, we do our best to honor them here today too. So my name is Nick Jurovich. I am the Associate Director of the Labor Resource Center and an Assistant Professor of Labor History and Public History here at UMass Boston. And it's my immense privilege to work on this project, which I have done pretty much since I arrived here at UMass Boston. Been very grateful for the tremendous support for kind of diving right into this, both from UMass and from BTU. And so I'm actually going to start with a whole bunch of thanks and then hand it off to some other folks to help us introduce this. Here at UMass, our whole history department, and particularly our public history team, Jane Becker, our director of public history, Carolyn Goldstein, Jess Colati, all of whom have been incredibly supportive in building this collection, building this course, which you'll hear about in a moment, in which we've built these exhibits. Also on the Labor Resource Center side, we have Steve here on the Zoom, Annetta and Wally here. Thank you so much for your support. Wally ordered our food, by the way. Apologies for those on Zoom. We can't get it to you virtually. And also Leonie Oscar, our student worker, graduating senior extraordinaire, who was responsible for getting all of the raw files that we got from the digitized Boston Union teacher into workable order to get them onto the site you'll see today. This is a really remarkable task, and we're so thankful to Leonie for that. And then that brings me also to our libraries, where Andrew Elder, I mentioned Carolyn already, Jessica, so many people have been so supportive of this project and really helped us actually build this sort of archive into the architecture that UMass Boston has built. Our librarians do so much with so little here. We are so grateful to them for creating this kind of world of open archives where we can build digital archives and share these resources with all of you, and also with this sort of wider sort of world that we do. And then, of course, this brings me to the Boston Teachers Union, our partner on this project, whose archives these are. Everyone has been so incredibly supportive from the leadership. I see Jessica and Eric here. Thank you so much for being here. To, of course, those of you who've participated in oral histories. I see Joan Devlin here. I think there's at least a couple other people who are joining us. These conversations are so rich and so important, and to be able to archive them here is so valuable. Natalia Quadra-Saez should acknowledge she's helped us connect with folks. Ari Brantz has helped us build these exhibits. And most of all, Betsy Drynan, who's here in person, so you all can't see her yet. You'll see her in a moment. Who originated this entire project. It would not exist without her. And you will hear from her talking about its origins in just a moment. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being a part of this. We're excited to launch these collections and then see where they go in so many ways. I want to take the time now to introduce Jessica Tang, who is president of the Boston Teachers Union. She's going to join us on Zoom to say a little, and I'm going to spotlight your video here so we can all see you.
Great. Thanks so much. I really wish I could be there in person, but as you had shared, we're about to head into contract negotiations in literally about 15 minutes. But I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. And as a history and social studies teacher myself, I can, I think, doubly appreciate just the efforts and the potential, the learning, and just the significance of this project. But I wanted to definitely give a really big thank you to you, Nick, and to Betsy Drynan. I remember when you two first met at the BT office and started talking about this idea, and that idea has just grown and grown and grown. And a lot of our staff and our members have, I think, really appreciated the opportunity to learn through this process and to contribute as well. So again, I have to thank Ari and many of our staff members. I think I saw Natalia and of course Eric, our vice president, and others on the Zoom and hopefully in person as well. And so just wanted to appreciate everyone. I've already learned a lot myself by getting some sneak previews of the work that's already been done. And, I think that in order for the Boston Teachers Union to continue to grow and be the best union that we can be, and to advance our missions of not just workers' rights and economic justice, but social justice and racial justice too, that it's important to reflect back on history and see, if there are mistakes. That clearly we've, I think made some mistakes that we need to learn from, but also see where we have done really well and learn from our successes as well. And so there's just a lot to learn, and a lot of really rich history here that's been collected. So thank you again to Nick and Betsy for spearheading this project, and all the students and BTU members who contributed and took the time to do so as well. So just thanks again.
Thank you so much. We know you're about to head into bargaining, and thank you for making this time, Jessica and Eric and everyone from BTU who's going into that session as well. It's my privilege now to bring up Betsy Drinan. And I should say, to introduce Betsy, retired just as of last year, Secretary Treasurer of the BTU, longtime teacher in Boston Public Schools.
Hi, thank you, everybody. It's great to see you all. Thanks for you people on Zoom and those people who are here. Boy, UMass is looking beautiful. I haven't been here for a while. I'm like, whoa, it looks great. Anyway, I just want to say a few words. As I was thinking about this today, like, what would I say up here? I think I realized that I've always been really interested in local community history. As a child, one of my greatest wishes was that I could experience time travel. I wanted to know what my neighborhood was like 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. I wanted to see who lived in my house and what their lives were like, and see what life was like on my piece of the planet before I was born. As a teacher, particularly when I taught social studies, I tried to incorporate local Boston history into my curriculum, searching out all sorts of resources and crafting lessons, trying to really engage kids in the study of the experiences of the people past and present in their communities and neighborhoods. However, the search for BTU history all started when I was elected Secretary Treasurer in 2017. And I started poking through drawers and files that were left from my predecessors. And I unearthed some interesting things that captured my imagination. Handwritten minutes from BTU meetings in the 1940s, before BTU was the official bargaining unit for BPS. A legal brief arguing for retaining seniority rights during the DSEG time period. The original Boston Teachers Union contract from the 60s. After speaking with various people at the BTU and doing some preliminary research, I began to realize that there really wasn't much of an effort to preserve the history of the BTU, and that and as the years went by, some really valuable experiences and understandings would be lost. And I thought that was really unfortunate. And I decided to see what could be done about it. So my good friend, John McColgan, is the archivist for the city of Boston. And he put me in touch with Andrew Elder and others at the UMass Archives, thinking they would be a good partner for efforts to preserve BTU history. Soon after, John, Kristen Pinto from the BTU Retired Teachers Chapter, and I met with Andrew and Jane Becker at UMass to discuss possible collaborations. One of the first initiatives was to connect with Carolyn Goldstein and discuss bringing one of her Mass Memory Roadshows to BTU, a BTU Digitizing Day, which would be an open call for all our members to bring artifacts to the BTU Hall to be photographed and documented in an effort to preserve items that our members thought important and valuable. There was also an opportunity to create short videos sharing experience with BTU and BPS. The event was a great success and spurred us on to do more. In the fall of 2019, Carolyn introduced me to Nick, who had recently started teaching at UMass. It was a wonderful partnership right from the very beginning. Nick is a wonderful human being and so easy to work with, and I'm really grateful for this partnership. So the BTU has maintained digital copies of its monthly newspaper, Boston Union Teachers, on its website, dating back to 2010. But that meant there were more than 45 years of newspapers not preserved. With the tremendous support of Adrian Washington, longtime BTU administrative assistant, we were able to search high and low and collect almost a full collection, dating back to November 1963, the edition issued right after President Kennedy was killed. We got a quote for digitizing the entire collection, and with the support of the BTU Executive Board and a vote of the BTU membership, the expenditure to digitize everything we had, which included a user-friendly search function, was approved. Once the digitizing was done, we made arrangements to officially donate these materials, including copies of all the BTU contracts and other documents, to UMass, and we're so grateful that we did. The next phase of the project was to start doing oral histories, interviewing our members to hear their story of teaching in BPS and participation in the BTU. This has been my favorite part. Nick and I have had the opportunity to have wonderful conversations, to spend long stretches of time talking with members, hearing their stories, why they got into education, how they got involved with the union, what their experience had been like. These interviews have illuminated so many issues, such as the development of special education, courtesy of Jane, who's sitting right here. The experience of Black teachers going to South Boston to work during the busing era, the stories of the various strikes, BTU meetings back in the day, and more. We took a brief break from doing the oral history interviews, but expect to be back at it soon. I'm so appreciative of everyone who has contributed to this project. I'm looking forward to the presentations of Nick's students, among the first researchers to actually use the materials we have collected, and look forward to continuing adding materials to our growing archives. You know, many people, and Jessica just said it herself, people, you need to know your history, right? So you don't make stupid mistakes, repeating yourselves over and over again. But the fact is, you can't know your history unless you actually collect it. And that's what this effort is all about. So thank you to everybody.
And I will say, just exactly as Betsy just said, it has been an absolute delight, a pleasure, and a privilege to work with her on this project. And it's just been remarkable that we've had the opportunity to do this work over the last 3 years, in spite of all that has happened and all that's gone on. Let me say now, so I see Michael McGuire's here. Michael joined our class with Ann Slater, the other editor of the Boston Union Teacher, a little earlier on. I wanted to give Michael the chance to say a couple of words about the paper today and how we can sort of think about these things living in the past and the present, and whatever else you'd like to say. So let me spotlight your video here. You're on.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to meet with the students. I don't think I could top what Betsy said, other than to say that as we move forward with the newspaper, I'm being mindful not only that what's being delivered now to our audience, but what we can tell future generations of teachers and students of journalism. My idea here with the newspaper is to give the current news, but in a time and place when people can tweet things out live. I'm thinking more about things that should be preserved, the longer story, the deeper story. Think of it as a memento of this point in time. So when I gather it together, and we're putting together the next edition right now, I try to think current news plus events so that people can have a snapshot of what's going on in our union and in our educational field at the time. So history will be the judge, but having spoken to your students and having embarked on this project, I am a little more cognizant that I'm not just putting out the information for now. I am saving a piece of the Boston Teachers Union history and even Boston's history. So it's an honor and a pleasure to be part of it. And I'm happy to come back anytime to talk to you students or have them give me feedback too. So thank you.
Fantastic. I don't know if you all on Zoom can hear the applause, but our room is excited to honor you all. I have to say one thing too about archives, because I see that AFT archivist Dan Galadner is on the call. Hi, Dan. And I have notes from when I went to the archives in Detroit in 2015 that just said, when I was looking at the AFT Massachusetts records, Dan Boston is killing me. I reminded Dan of this last summer and said, I think that was because they weren't in the archive. He said, yeah. So Dan, now there are. There are archives. We're going to share them in just a moment. And thank you so much also for your support of this project and helping us think through how to do all of this. I want to now, speaking of archives and librarians, introduce our reference archivist, Jessica Holden, who has also joined our class and been incredibly supportive of this project, as have the whole libraries.
All right, hello everybody. I'm Jessica Holden, and on behalf of University Archives and Special Collections, I just want to say that it's been such a joy working on this initiative. The archives at UMass Boston focuses our collections on the university's urban mission and its strong focus on community engagement. And we have particular focuses on local labor history and workers' rights. So we're just so grateful to have been able to partner with the BTU to help preserve and provide access to the archival materials that tell the long and important history of the BTU. And we've also just been so excited and happy to work with Nick and the amazing students in his class as they interpret and help tell the stories that are contained in these materials. It's just been so wonderful. And we hope that this will lead to kind of further collaborations with other labor unions in the local area, including here on our own campus. We've recently started collecting and digitizing materials of our faculty staff union, and we'll be reaching out to our other campus unions. And so this entire kind of world of labor history archives is just so exciting for us. And to the BTU folks, good luck in bargaining. I hope you get some really good wins. So thanks.
This reminds me to say, if you haven't, of course, go to the BTU site, btu.org. We can drop a link in the chat, see what they're negotiating for. And while we're at it, we have ongoing negotiations on our campus, our classified staff union. If you're in the room, we have some flyers. Also, our graduate employee organization. As a historian, I'm here to talk about the past. As a unionized educator, here to talk about fighting for the schools our students deserve, and of course for the rights and the sort of recognition of our workers on campus and in Boston Public Schools. So thank you all for all the work you're doing on these contract campaigns. So the last thing I want to say here before we get started with the archives themselves is just that in the course of putting this together, it's been so incredible to see these connections emerging. And so when Jessica was speaking, it reminded me that in the exhibits you'll see that our students have built, you'll see other unions, you'll see other archives from UMass Boston, you'll see the way in which this lives in the world with so many different kind of potential sort of ways to explore these archives and to build them into larger projects. And that's something I wanted to come back to, this idea that today is really a launch. We've just sort of scratched the surface, I think, of the potential that these archives have to inform how we think about the past and the present of teacher organizing, of education, of the history of Boston and beyond. So with that, I want to actually go ahead and share the screen and start showing you all what we've done and what we've collected. So bear with me. So we're going to come back to this in a moment. This is our companion website, but I want to start here at our Open Archives portal. This is the new and improved portal to the Boston Teachers Union collection, featuring some items across the top there from the collection. You'll see 3 links below. First up, the Boston Union Teacher. Here it is. 377 issues. Again, thanks to Leani Oscar for doing so much work helping us get these posted. And of course, to BTU for supporting the not just digitization, but full text searchable digitization. So you can drop a term in here and it will pull up all through this incredible run of issues. It's also a lot of fun to browse them and see so many things. This is one of my favorites, of course. This is the victory in 1965 when the BTU was elected as the collective bargaining agent for Boston teachers. So that's one piece of this, one leg of our 3-legged stool, as it were. Next up is the Oral History Project. And as Betsy said, it has been such a privilege and a pleasure to speak to union leaders, organizers, educators. These are often conversations which we ask people sort of to think about hard histories, intimate pasts. People have been so giving and so kind. And these are full and complete, not just audio files, but transcripts as well. I'm pulling up Joan Devlin's. I saw her on the screen. These are downloadable. They're also things that can be used in clips and in other forms. And we're thinking about that, and you'll see some of that in our exhibits today. But it's most importantly just such a rich record of the lived experiences, the organizing efforts, the ideas, and the lives of Boston Teachers Union members. And we're so grateful that you share your stories with us. And finally, as Betsy mentioned, we have the BTU Digitizing Day. This is a remarkable collection in that it was collected from the community. People brought in these wonderful photos, these flyers, these clippings. And if you navigate down here, you can also see the 18 short interviews collected in video on that day. So a huge thanks to Betsy and to Carolyn Goldstein for putting that on and putting it together. It's a really wonderful collection. So these are the collections. This is in some ways primarily what we are launching today. These are out in the world. And I should add, our Open Archive platform at UMass Boston. I've got to do a good job of looking at the room and not just the screen, I realize. Hi, everyone in the room. This archive is linked into a portal called Digital Commonwealth, through which all of the digitized collections in Massachusetts are searchable. And that itself is linked into something called Digital Public Library of America. So these are incredible digitizing initiatives into which these resources are now sort of linked and connected. And make them accessible, not just to researchers, but to students, to the general public, in ways where they can live in a whole variety of initiatives. So we're so thrilled about this. This is the collection, and it's so rich and also fully and freely available online, which is so exciting. The next two things I want to talk about then are what we've built in a class called Digital Public History. And I want to acknowledge the 11 students in Digital Public History. I can't turn the camera, I'm sitting back there. This is the first time I have taught Digital Public History. They have endured all of the challenges that come with a first-time teacher teaching a first-time class, and have done so with grace and poise and tremendous talents of their own. The course has been a delight and a true privilege for me to teach, and what you'll see they've built is really remarkable, I should say in about 6 weeks. So the other thing I want to emphasize is what you're seeing now. The collections are live, they are archival collections. Dive into them, search them, find them. If you have questions about them, send them our way. But what we're showing you now are what we've built. So first, a research guide, and then our exhibits. And in talking about these, we are absolutely eager to hear your feedback because these are first drafts. These are the beginnings of a process through which we start to imagine what we can do with this history. So let me show you in that case. This is what's called a LibGuide, a research guide for students, for researchers, for anyone who comes to learn more about how to use these collections and think about the history of teacher unionism in Boston. And I want to introduce the two students who built it, Evan McDonough and Kayla Allen, to talk about it now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Evan McDonough. I'm a first-year graduate student here at UMass Boston in the history department and hoping to become an archivist.
Hi, I'm Kayla. I'm a second-year grad student at UMass Boston, and I'm my track is archival studies, but I'm also working on public history graduate certificate.
Today, we're going to be presenting to you all very briefly this companion project to the exhibits that the rest of our classmates have been working on with the BTU collections going into the end of the spring, and the wonderful work that they've been able to do. To draw on a point that Nick has touched on, a big part of accessing these collections is access. We have all these wonderful resources that have been made available by the BTU, by people here at UMass Boston. We have the collections, we have the digitizing day, we have these oral histories, we have these exhibits. But the thing is, they're not useful by themselves. People need to be able to access them. And so that is the point of what is colloquially called a LibGuide in academia, otherwise a research guide. You can think of this as an aid that is meant to make resources available to contextualize these research and access to a particular subject, but not to force you into a particular path, but instead enable you to access something, to find stories, and to make stories with these collections. This LibGuide here is a LibGuide that Kayla and I have created for the BTU collections, and it consists of 4 sections. First, an introductory homepage, the essence of which is to contextualize what is this? What is the BTU? What are these collections? What's available to you? And sort of give you a bit of a primer so you can go into this, figuring out what you want to search. The second part being a section about the collections here at UMass Boston. specifically the collection itself, the Boston Union Teacher, the results of the Digitization Day, and the Oral Histories, as well as other collections here at UMass Boston that are relevant to the BTU and its activities here in the present day. Third section being about just the exhibits, emphasizing what our classmates here have done and showing the stories that already have been told and showing the potential of the stories that have yet to be found, as well as external resources that aren't at UMass Boston, but we think are still important to understanding the BTU and getting to the meat of labor history, teaching, and education in Boston. This first bit here, this introduction, is important. First, starting off with this image here, just to give you an idea of the BTU is present and the BTU is active. Thank you, Kella. As well as providing a short overview of how this project came to be. We think it's important that when you're accessing, you understand maybe you aren't a person who is familiar with the BTU, who the BTU is, and moreover, how these collections came to be, so that you can go into the rest, into accessing these other resources, knowing what they are, as well as just some resources for contacting UMass Boston if you want to access these collections yourself.
Next, we'll go to the collections page. So right here, we have a page that is dedicated completely to all of the collections that we have at UMass Boston that are related to this topic. So over here, we have all links to the collections related directly to the Boston Teachers Union. We have the collection, which includes the BUT, the Boston Union Teacher, and the interviews. And we have here the direct links to both of those. And then we also have the Boston Teachers Union Digitizing Day. And then the UMass Boston collection has, the UMass Boston Archives has some really incredible collections that Jessica kind of referred to. Labor is a huge part of what UMass Boston wants to collect. So we have the Judge Arthur Garrity Chamber papers about desegregation. We have the Mosaic records. Mosaic was a magazine created by students at the South Boston High School during desegregation. The 1919 Boston police strike, I don't know, Ione, Malloy papers, the Robert C. Hayden interviews with Boston African American Railroad workers. So we've got some really beautiful things that you can check out here. The next page we'll look at is the page dedicated to our project. So this is exploring the Boston Teachers Union collection. What we got here is an introduction to the project. We have a link to the blogs that we created, which were the first kind of foray into the project. And then we have a link to the exhibits. And each exhibit has its own photograph and a little bit of information about it. And you can click through the gallery here and find access to every single exhibit. And when you want to go to one, you can click on it. So those are those, and then I'll let Evan talk about our external resources page.
Yes, so we have a lot of meat to dig into just here with what's available, made available at UMass Boston. We also have here realizing that there's some external resources that can be helpful for people who want to understand the BTU, understand the context of some of the things they find in these records. So the first off, just having some external resources. For instance, the Beyond Busing that's hosted at Northeastern. We have also the AFT records of the Walter P. Ruther Library at Wayne State University. We have the Boston Phoenix Internet Archive, which is also very helpful, which is a general interest magazine that was published in Boston, has relevant information. The National Education Association records and others, and sort of similar resources that, though not from the BTU specifically or necessarily always in Boston, are good external resources that can be helpful if you're searching and may want to find information that isn't directly from at UMass Boston or in the collection. We also have here a bibliography, just public works of interest that aren't in the collection, but are sort of secondary resources that have been produced from, based around this history, on this history. And we have it here divided on different topics, such as on the Boston Teachers Union, on public education, political organization, on teacher unionism. And that way, all this information is available. The point of this, I think, and this is an important thing to circle back to with this LibGuide, with this research guide, is that it is an access point through UMass Boston and a companion to the exhibits that are to come. A place where we can have all this information together so that instead of having to search for everything and perhaps not being able to find that thread, you can look through this and have an easy to find resource to access wonderful collections, this history that more importantly, access exhibits as well, stories that have been created and be inspired, hopefully find stories that have not been revealed. And on that note, speaking of stories, looking at the stories that our wonderful classmates have created with these records, let's turn to them.
Thank you so much, Evan and Kayla. And this reminds me, so these LibGuides, library guides, are used all the time in teaching here at UMass Boston. And it's a reminder of yet another connection. We are right now, I think, the largest trainer of teachers for the Boston Public Schools in the city. Lots and lots of BTU members, including Betsy, have come through UMass Boston. So these are opportunities for us to think about how we teach this history in classes with future teachers and current teachers. I should also add, if you see this page and you're trying to access something at UMass Boston and you do not have a library card or an external access password, be in touch. We will figure out a way to get you that access. Let me also share, I realize I shared these on screen with those on Zoom, but I can drop these in the chat for you all. So let me go ahead and drop these in now so you can see that's the collections page. And then here we have our LibGuide. I'll drop the home page in there. So having done that, the last thing I will share here on the Zoom for you all, if we go back to that launch page here, here is our companion site. And this has been such a joy to create, learning, using, developing content on the WordPress platform on the fly. And if you look here, what you'll see is we have, so among other things, we've got a blog, we've got collections pages. If you scroll down as well, you'll see those collections pages here. You can link right through and learn more about those collections, link back out to them. One thing you'll notice, we've got a lot of cross-linking here. The collections link to the site, which link back to it. They link to the library guide, which link to it. We want these ideas and these sort of interests of people's to circulate so they make their way through all of this to spark people's own explorations in these collections. I also like this platform. It lets us show some of this stuff off, looking big, looking beautiful, like this image of a rally in March of 1970 before the Boston Teachers Union went on its first strike. So among the things we have here, we have a blog, we have our collections, and then we have our digital exhibits. And these have been such a joy to create and build. We've got to kind of, oh, is that not linked? There we are. Also, some of our students here at work in the library, but this is our table of contents for these exhibits, featuring a really wide range of content. And I'm going to walk through them now and let our students talk about what they've been building and how they've been doing this. So first up is Jordan Cooper, who's working on a teachers union timeline here. So I'm going to open up this and let Jordan talk a little about it.
All right, hey everyone. I'm very nervous right now. So I'm Jordan Cooper. I'm an MA student in the history department with an archives track. And one of my main focuses in my program is labor history. And I've taken many classes with Nick here. But that's why I've really enjoyed being part of this project. You know, documenting the BTU's history. So my task in this project was building the BTU contract timeline. And the timeline is based on the BTU's own timeline from 2019. So my goal in building this timeline was to add some historical context to the BTU's own timeline. In the introduction to their timeline, which you'll actually find on this page. So this is the timeline that I worked off of. So in their introduction, that they commemorate the painstaking work that members past and present undertook to make their hard-won to get their hard-won contractual gains. And for the timeline, the sources that I mainly used were the Boston Union Teacher. And I also supplemented with the Boston Globe's online database. And then some of the photos, as you can see here, are from the digitizing day. This one is actually when they were when the BTU is marching to City Hall, just before that first photo that Nick showed, when they went on strike in 1970. And actually, that was actually one of my favorite slides to make, was so this timeline, I should also mention, was made on Timeline.js, which is a program that was made by Northwestern University. So it starts with obviously when the BTU officially became the Boston Teachers sole bargaining agent. And this slide includes a screenshot of the Boston Union Teacher from when when it was officially what am I trying to say? When they officially became the bargaining agent for Boston Teachers. But my most favorite slide that I made in this one was actually the one where they went on strike in 1970. And I also included that photo that Nick showed before. So yeah, just some background on that one. So the BTU, in March of 1970, they asked the Boston School Committee for raises. It was $2,000 to $4,400 in raises on a 9-step scale, because before that it was a 10-step scale. And I found throughout this project that most of the main points of contention when it comes to like the bargaining was on salaries and benefits. And the committee counter offered with only $400 to $600 in raises, and it would be on the same 10-step scale. The BTU refused, and they did have some further negotiations over the next couple of weeks, but they couldn't come to an agreement. So the BTU decided to go on strike for one day on March 24th. So that's what this photo is. And then there were more negotiations over the following weeks. Yet again, they weren't able to come to an agreement. So the BTU went on strike again in May of 1970. And then they went on strike for 13 days. Again, they were not able to, well, after that, in June of 1970, they decided to take it into arbitration. And that took several months until August of 1970. The arbitration panel recommended the raises that the Boston School Committee came up with, but it would be on the 9-step scale and not on the 10-step scale. In addition to that, the BTU also got an extra personal day, so teachers now had 2 personal days instead of just 1. And they also increased the amount of money that the Boston School Committee was to pay for the health and welfare fund. So that's like health insurance, dental, vision. It was raised from $50 to $100 per teacher. They also introduced career awards. So that includes raises for years of service. And this, so this timeline is far from finished, but I am still working on it. There is a lot in this timeline because the BTU has been around for over 50 years. But I definitely welcome feedback, and it's really been a joy to build this project.
I should add, so Jordan took this on. We first started playing with this actually last fall for the organizing conference when Ari and Natalia reached out to Betsy and I and said, hey, we're putting together a slideshow. Do you have some historical photos? And we said, well, do we ever? And so giving this to Jordan along with, this was something Eric Berg suggested, the timeline that Richard Stutman has kept for a long time and running the BTU Union Teacher every September has been a lot of fun. And thank you, Jordan, for taking this project on. Also wanted to add on feedback, as we said, these are first drafts. If you scroll to the bottom of your page, at the bottom of every page, you'll see contact us and share your feedback. Please do contact us. That's an email address that goes to Betsy and I. The share your feedback is a Google form. Please, by all means, share your ideas, share your reactions with us. We love to hear from you. So I want to now bring up for our next exhibit, one that actually stretches back even before the, actually, let me navigate here this way. Before the contract, or sorry, the first, what am I trying to say? This one stretches back before the BTU won collective bargaining rights. So this is Megan Aaron's project on women's voices in the BTU.
My notes together. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Ahrens. I am a second-year graduate history student. I'm on the public history track with a certificate in archives. And when it comes to the BTU, this project was a little intimidating at first because I know virtually nothing about unions. But what I do know about is teachers, because I come from an amazing family of women in education. My mom, both of my grandmothers, my sister, and two of my aunts were all involved in the education system, or still are, back in Michigan. In fact, one of my aunts was my 5th grade teacher. So hearing that, yes, this was going to be about unions, but more specifically about teachers and paraprofessionals was incredibly exciting and meant a lot to me. So I was very excited to dive into women in the BTU and in the Boston Public Schools. But what I noticed pretty quickly is that women's voices tended to be overshadowed for a long period of time. Women were actually the primary creator of the BTU in 1945. They made up almost the entire organizing committee, and Mary Cadigan, Dr. Mary Cadigan, which I have learned, was the first president of the BTU. However, not long after, they were pushed out of leadership and male voices began to take over. But of course, that didn't stick around because of women's liberation. And fortunately, women's voices began to emerge even more. So I'm gonna go over to women in the BTU. This is my main collection. So this focus is on not only women in the BTU, but specifically their own voices. I didn't want this to be a project in which women's narratives were just pushed into the already existing narrative. It didn't feel like a real women's history. So I decided to focus specifically on women's voices throughout the history of the BTU, because first off, they are the majority of educators and paraprofessionals in our country. And second, because those voices have always existed. It's not that they suddenly disappeared, it's that they were pushed aside. They have always been there, and women are always been part of the narrative. So the goal of this exhibit is to make women part of that narrative again and make sure that they're heard once more. So this page includes mostly articles from the Boston Union Teacher, because that was a platform in the 70s and 80s for women to have their voices heard in the BTU, and then also some materials from the Digitizing Day collection. For instance, the initial minutes of the organizational meeting, which put the BTU into action and made several women, majority women, the administration of the BTU. This is my favorite article that I have found, favorite issue in general, actually, of the Boston Union Teacher, because, and it was the first one that caught my attention because women formed a committee in the BTU and hosted their own conference to talk about specifically women's issues. So that's the majority of it, highlighting the second ever female president of the BTU. And then, of course, I had to include paraprofessionals because they are significantly important for the BTU's history, and because my mother was one as well. So This page is a bit more incomplete compared to the rest of the exhibit. And specifically, I would love, this is almost like a timeline of teachers' aides fighting for their contracts and for their representation. I would love to make this an explorable resource that visitors can actually use to learn more, instead of getting all the information just from this page, be able to click on articles that interest them and explore the resources that talk about their fight for representation and their fight for decent contracts. Additionally, I would really like to add some information on Title IX and Chapter 622, because those are very important moments in women's education history. And I would actually like to add in more women's voices, including interviews and oral histories, because we can't have enough of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan. And yeah, so much more to build, and yet it's so exciting to see these coming together in the way that they have. Next up, I want to call up Macie Mark, and we're going to talk about the way in which, let me pull this up, the Boston Teacher Union stands in solidarity with other unions. And I know we have some representatives, at least from, I believe, Lynn and IUE Local 201, who are represented in this exhibit. So
hello, I'm Macie Mark. I am a first year's master's student getting concentration in public history, but also getting my certificate in archives. And so I'm focusing on how the BTU stands in solidarity with other unions. And I do want to talk a bit about how I got into this topic. So I also work as an archives assistant in the UMass archives here. And I was inventorying a collection of Tess Ewing, which recently came to UMass. And she is a local activist in Boston, really has her hand in everything. But what she kind of got her start or rose up in is with the school bus drivers union. So I was inventorying her collection and came across her almost complete collection of newsletters called Hazard Lights. From when they were unionizing and also on strike. And so I really enjoyed reading that, got a little distracted. And was also in this class at the same time, and I saw the connection, so I wanted to bring them out. And so for my exhibit, I also focused on 3 other strikes: the General Electric strike of 1970, the Gallo Grapes strike of February 1975, J.P. Stevens boycott in 1979, and then finally the School Bus Drivers Union in 1980. And this is a really interesting decade, because this is kind of a decade of militancy, and a lot was going on in the 1970s. We haven't really had a time or a decade with as many strikes or actions taking place since then, as well as this is all going on in the background of desegregation is happening as well. So I'm just going to show you guys a little bit of the School Bus Drivers Union, because that is my favorite one. And so I have a photo here from the strike. This is from the Boston Teachers Union November 1980 issue. And so this strike was a really ugly one. It went on for just over a month. And it was about the bus drivers trying to get a contract with the Boston School Committee, because the Boston School Committee wanted to hire new bus drivers with the new company every single year. But the bus drivers were arguing and were right that it was much safer to have the same people who are already trained come back each year. They also wanted more time to check out their buses in the morning to make sure that they were safe and had met the requirements. And so these all seem like good things. But the ARA, the company, and the Boston School Committee did not agree. And so they went on strike. They picketed at the schoolyard, and it got quite ugly as the ARA hired scab bus drivers and actually ran over one of the union bus drivers on the picket line. And I got this wonderful political cartoon of scab drivers going out. That says ARA right there, and okay, the coast is clear, the scab can go. And I like how they put all the rats on the bus. And this is actually goes alongside the article detailing the strike written by Richard Stutman, future president of the BTU. And so the Boston Teachers Union supported the strike in a variety of ways. One is just writing these articles, but also by actually showing up to the picket. They went and they represented, there's some poetry here from a teacher who went to the picket line and saw Jean Bruskin be run over by a bus. But they also showed their support in a variety of other ways. One, by simply offering them a place to meet. The school bus driver union originally meets and still meets today at the Boston Teacher Union meeting hall. And so right here, I also have a issue of Hazard Lights from July 1980, where they are talking also about the coalition formed, also blown up a little bit right here, easier to read, that the BTU and the school bus drivers unions formed and still have today, talking about the interests of the students. So the school bus drivers were successful. They were able to get a contract and have everyone rehired, or most everyone rehired. There was a couple sticking points, and seniority and the extra time as well. So overall, this was a very successful strike, and it wouldn't have been possible without the support of the other local unions. So for this digital exhibit, there's more work to be done, as always, but I'm also still working on building out Gallo Grapes, JP Stevens, and adding a little bit more to General Electric. Yeah, I'm very excited to explore this topic, and I loved delving into Tess Ewing's collection as well. So thank you.
Can I do a little asterisk?
Yes, we have an asterisk.
So Tess, you.
Come do it. This is Annette Argyros, who knows a thing or two about union organizing in the greater Boston area.
Hey, everybody online. I'm currently the director of our labor extension program here out of the Labor Resource Center at UMass Boston. I took Tess's job when she retired. So she went on from being an activist to come to UMass Boston and help found this statewide project of using the university's resources to do worker extension work. So to teach workers across the Commonwealth about their rights, help workers form unions, and help workers make their unions more democratic and more engaged in the battle for workers' rights. So, and then I'll have to scold Tess because she never told me she was giving her archives to us. But that's where she went.
And Annette, I'm glad you shared that. And also, so Macie has taught us so much. I'm so glad they're doing their final capstone project on this incredible collection. And so there's much more to come here. And this is just so exciting. So thank you, Macie. And so I also want to highlight the way in which the collections we have here at UMass Boston connect. I believe we're going to see that in our next exhibit as well. Where's Rachel? We've got, so now we, of course, are getting into a history that is, certainly well known and remains deeply contentious here in Boston. We're coming up, of course, on 50 years since the desegregation order went into effect. There's certainly a lot of history to think about and talk about. Rachel's begun to start doing it here.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Racheloyle, and I'm a second-year master's student in the history program with a concentration in public history. And actually, Megan and myself will be graduating in a couple weeks, so that's all right. And so the topic I chose to work on for this project was desegregation. And right from the get-go, I knew that desegregation itself was far too big of a topic to cover in 6 weeks. So I knew I would have to narrow things down substantially. And the way I did that was just by combing through the records that we have, both in the oral histories as well as the digitization day and the Boston Union Teacher archives. And what I realized is that 1974 as a year itself was so tumultuous and so impactful, both in terms of what happened as well as the legacy that that desegregation would have on the city of Boston and still does today, as I'm sure most of you know. Yeah, so let's take a look. And this picture here was one of the first that I found regarding, well, it's not about desegregation, but I talked about this in class last week as well, so my classmates have already heard this. But I saw this picture, and we also watched Eyes on the Prize, which is a phenomenal documentary. And it just made me very emotional that this whole desegregation was such a long, drawn out fight. And here we just have Black students that just want to learn. They just want to learn with the same quality of education as white students had prior to 1974. So I really love this image of just a Black student cutting a piece of paper because she didn't know or may not have known the magnitude of the fight going on around her, but she definitely was affected by it. So here we have the landing page, and I took an approach quite a bit different than I have to most other digital history projects, because I only studied resources from 1974. And I stuck to talking about 1974 rather than the greater impact of desegregation. And that was hard, but I think it was worthwhile. So I go month by month in this project, and it really builds into a crescendo until September, when everything is implemented in the 1974-75 school year. So you can see here month by month, we go through, we have Jack Doherty, who was BTU president in 74. And also the oral histories were very valuable. I really appreciate everyone who conducted the oral histories as well as people who participated in them, because I felt like having those voices made talking about desegregation easier as well as harder, but it certainly made it, it certainly helped it hit home a little more closely than it otherwise would have. So I tried to include a lot of multimedia letters in this exhibit as well. And this is actually my favorite page that I did. So as was talked about previously, we have the Judge W. Arthur Garrity collection of papers at UMass Boston. And combing through these archives was difficult in some ways, because you see just how much racism was taking place in Boston in 74 and before. So for this page, I did include a warning, but rather than including my own interpretation, I just posted the letters that people wrote to Garrity in reaction to desegregation. And yeah, if you get a chance, I'd love for people to read through the exhibit as well as these letters. Let me know your feedback, and just learn about desegregation, learn how we got where we are today.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And of course, another exhibit that I think highlights the ways in which multiple themes, multiple ideas, histories we know and histories we don't connect in this incredible archive, and also how it can connect to other resources we have here at UMass Boston, like the Garrity papers. I'm also realizing some of you are trying to talk to us on Zoom, and I haven't looked into the chat. Lot of really great enthusiasm. And a question from our Director of Public History. Can we share a bit about our process for deciding on the themes and exhibits? All right, well, that was 10 minutes ago, 20 almost. Sorry, Jane. We'll try to as we continue on. That'll be a question we can take, actually. We will take some questions. Now, moving on. So, of course, folks in the BTU do know 1974 as a momentous year. They also know 1981 as a momentous year. And we've had the privilege of having three sort of students working together on different projects, different aspects of this history. I want to call up Eleanor, who dove into this, talking to Ari Brandt, who I believe is here. Thank you, Ari. And working from research Ari did in the ULA for Educators program out at UMass Amherst, and connecting a really remarkable paper Ari wrote to this digital exhibit. So this is very much a kind of joint project. I'll let Eleanor say more about that, and I'll call that up here for you all. If I can do it without. Oh, it's the top one. There it is.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eleanor Katari, and I am a graduate student in the public history track here. I am also very much aware at this particular moment of being a parent of students in public schools for the last decade in Oakland, California. And Oakland teachers just on Friday went on a one-day strike to protest school closures that will absolutely increase educational inequities, and did in fact not even follow the district's own process for closing schools. So none of this is theoretical. All of this is real and here and now, as our folks who are in negotiations right now definitely know. So yeah, and I do need to do an absolute shout out first and foremost to Ari Brands of the BTU. Yay! Yeah, I was gonna say, I was gonna give them a chance also. Just that Ari has done this. I had the great like privilege of using this amazing paper that Ari had written in the fall, talking about this and diving into it in depth. And so I was able just to like take giant chunks of Ari's text and work on sort of filling that out and illustrating it with these resources that we have available. Do you want me to give Ari a chance now or in a minute?
Yeah,
Maybe in a minute. Okay, sure. And so as you can see here, we like in the same way that like 1974 has resonance, 1981 definitely has resonance. And what was lovely is I was able to take these pieces, and we have like people's words is one thing. And then we're able to add in people's voices, and you can actually hear clips of the oral histories, clips of the interviews. Yeah, I was gonna, so you can hear, this is Brenda Cheney talking.
Who was an educator since like 1966, and she had to fight her way to get to be a teacher. It wasn't like automatic, you get out of college, you take the test and you join. She had to fight. They did not hire teachers of color. Didn't do it.
Yeah, and so you can see how that extra layer of being able to hear that and hear the feeling and the passion in people's voices. And I think that was one of the things that I really noticed in doing this, in that you look at the words and that's one thing, but then again, to hear the sorrow and the anger and the pain and the feelings that the words 1981, that the words the 710 still call up for people was really powerful. And that's what I'm hoping will get conveyed through this. I do have one very specific request from BTU members, which is that I really love like seeing the words, and I really love hearing the voices, and I would really, really love to see your faces. And so I have interview clips from Barb Marshall, from Barbara Field, from Brenda Cheney, and I'm here like sort of combing through the archives to see if I can find photographs. So if you could contact Betsy and Nick with headshots, and I'm sure there's some form or something that you could fill out that we could be able to use that. That is my specific request. Okay. And then Ari, do you want to unmute yourself? Is that possible?
Yeah, Ari, you can unmute. Yeah, and then you can see a little picture of you. That'll work.
Yeah.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. No, I want to say thank you to Nick. I think in particular, when I started writing this paper for my labor history class with Dave Camper, the first source that I was able to use was these oral history interviews. And I think I spent, I don't know how many hours listening to every single one, because it was so enriching to be able to really hear it in people's voice. Hear BTU members that I have known for a while, but never heard these stories from them directly. And then what I really wanted to do through the paper that I wrote was really uplift the experiences and narratives of Black educators in the union. And part of that is to bring this work forward into what we're trying to do now. We are not there as a union, but we are working hard to think about what a truth and reconciliation process would look like. And part of that is knowing our own history. And so being able to hear it in members' own words. And then I think I finished writing the paper for the class just as these archives kind of got online and went live. And so to have students be able to then comb through more of the archives and put pictures and a little bit more context in there is really special. So thank you so much for collaborating and keeping this work moving forward.
Thank you. I don't know how to unscroll these. Oh, wait, I did have one other thing. I don't think there are any undergraduates in here, but I'm trying to do shout outs for Nick is doing a walking tours class of downtown Boston Fridays in the fall. You can spend every Friday afternoon hanging out with Nick and walking around and learning more about Boston history. So if you're interested, look me up.
Eleanor, thank you for that unplanned shout out. And we do, actually, I see we have a student, Anthony here from, I'm teaching an undergraduate course this term on work and education in the United States. So it's all coming together. And do want to acknowledge too, I know I mentioned Joan earlier, we have actually Richard Stutman's on the call, who shared an oral history with us. Janie Frank, Sherry Brooks Roberts are here. Thank you again so much for these. These oral histories just truly are one of a kind. And so we had a kind of team working on 1981, the importance of this date, and using Ari's research. Thank you, Ari, so much. I will say, having collected those oral histories and sat in the room to see what you did with them in that paper just blew my mind. It was so inspiring and just reaffirmed the value of this work for me in that moment. So I'm so glad you wrote that, and we look forward to seeing it in print in some way or another. But let me now, I'm going to quickly check our chat again in case I'm forgetting or missing any other questions. All right, we've got some great enthusiasm here in the chat. Thank you, everyone. And so now I want to bring up Elizabeth Mann, who's going to speak about her exhibit on 1981, and specifically on Kathy Kelly and Kevin White.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Liz Mann. I'm a first-year student in the master's program for public history. And my topic was inspired by this picture that I found in the Boston Union Teacher. This is an article that Kathy Kelly, then president of the BTU, wrote about the corruption and the obstruction of Kevin White while they were in the heart of a very tumultuous fight. And as we're going to hear continually, 1980 through 1982, tumultuous is the word that really pops up the most. That and racism and budgets. So here's Kevin White. Kind of looks a little bit like Ted Kennedy with that jawline and those eyebrows there, but this is our own Boston's Tammany Hall, folks. Kevin White, the mayor of Boston, a long legacy, kind of modeled his reign after Chicago's Mayor Daley. He was the mayor of Boston from 68 to 84. And he ran on a platform against Boston School Committee Louise Day Hicks, who was anti-busing, anti-desegregation. So Kevin White won in no small part with the help of Italian and Black votes. He starts out going pretty strong, and Kathleen Kelly got along with him at the time, but that really devolves when we get into the budget crisis. Also, I want to give a shout out to Ari. Thank you so much for your research. That really helped me understand just the politics and finance of how to run a city, how to run a school system. It like the details were so valuable in trying to understand what this fight means and looks like. So I'll give you a little background on Kevin, because we kind of have a lot of information in the Boston Union Teacher about Kathy. But so as Kevin White basically decides to create a political machine, and as he comes to power, he rewards his supporters with city hall jobs and city contracts. And during 1980, there's a few things happening that kind of make everybody come down. Kathy Kelly is trying to, as the leadership of the BTU, get the budget approved, and Kevin White is blocking her at every turn. The budget is approved in court. However, Kevin White abuses his power of mayor to not approve the budget. And so they go back to court continually, and the court says Kevin White did not have the power as a mayor to disapprove the budget, but he appeals it. And meanwhile, Kathleen Kelly is going back to court to fight affirmative action at every opportunity. So these are two powers that be fighting each other and fighting the school committee and fighting, in Kelly's case, fighting Garrity's phase 2 of the affirmative action part of desegregation. And so this picture also, the BUT is full of these amazing cartoons here. This is kind of the explosion that happens in the midst of this crisis, and that Proposition 2.5 passes in 1980 and will go into action in 82. And so the BTU is trying to get the budget approved. They're running on a budget of $195 million, and what they need is at least $242 million. And part of that is also to get the new court-mandated special needs program in action, which requires more money and paraprofessionals and more teachers. And this is during desegregation and busing and white flight. And so the inevitable happens. Proposition 2.5 passes. 2.5 was the proposition that limited the property tax in all of Massachusetts to 2.5% of the property value, which cost the state millions and millions of dollars. So suddenly Kevin White really has extra leverage in that, hey, there's no money. What do you want me to do? Go to the school department if you want more money. The school department's like, well, if you want the extra 15 million that you need, you're going to have to go to Kevin White. And so it just gets worse. And as you can see, businesses, landlords, anybody in Kevin White's pocket, anybody that Kevin White is in the pocket of, are coming out on top, and municipal departments are suffering. There are cutbacks in services, not just for the schools, and they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars, and nobody's taking responsibility for it. It gets better because eventually the 90s are over. Here's a problematic cartoon, but it's also talking about, in the midst of the budget crisis, there are many reasons for schools closing and for cramming more and more students into larger and larger classrooms with fewer and fewer services. And then there's, of course, to strike or not to strike. And then we kind of get to the heart of what's going to be both Kathy Kelly as well as Kevin White's downfall. Kathy Kelly, in trying to fight for seniority of teachers who are predominantly white, really alienates teachers of color, also alienating parents of color, and kind of forgetting students of color. And so the union is divided, and without the votes of those people, her attempts to strike in order to force the hand don't come to fruition, which really topples her reign, as it were. White, however, is really coming out on top at the time because it looks like he is winning over the school committee and over the Boston Teachers Union. Meanwhile, as schools are closing and his buddies are getting the city contracts, real estate developers are turning schools into condos. I have to end on a positive note. Yay, Dukakis gets reelected. Yay. Thank goodness. There's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, but the biggest light at the end of this tunnel is learning from these mistakes that were made. In 1981, there start to be investigations into Kevin White's City Hall, and his legacy gets brought down on corruption charges. 20 of the City Hall employees are indicted. A bunch of his businessman friends are also indicted. White manages to escape that, but his political career is over. And Kathleen Kelly also in 1983 decides that she is not going to run for re-election at the same time that Mayor White knows that he is not going to run for mayoral re-election. And so despite all these budget problems, Dukakis comes in and aligns with a lot of unions in order to help fill the budget crisis and smooth things over. And so here's Dukakis with teachers and unions really talking about what they need and being in conversation with these folks. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Liz. And so I want to check and see how we're doing on no comments here. All right, I haven't missed anyone. So Maddie, come on up. Maddie's working on a draft of the third sort of leg of this. This is looking at the unified facilities plan, another part of the sort of story here. Let me get us back to the top of the page. So Maddie, we got to get this posted under digital exhibits here. All right, so anyway, just go.
I didn't into that too much. My name is Matthew Patton. I am a first-year graduate student in the public history track. Just the public history track. I know everyone else is taking archives courses too, but just one for me. I want to start this off by saying this is a very rough and ongoing draft because I am not electronically inclined, which is kind of odd for very young people. So it's so this thing is kind of a mess and I'm still trying to clean it up. But anyway, much of my paper is very similar to what Liz has talked about, just a little more condensed, and it leads in a slightly, or paper exhibit, and it leads in a slightly different direction. But I began it with this prelude that comes from the just before segregation, is that the Boston Teachers Union was already considering how desegregation would impact the schools in terms of enrollments, and of course, how it would impact themselves in their contracts, bargaining, and of course, funding. So I have this prelude here that includes them talking about the issues surrounding desegregation, Judge Garrity's orders and decisions, and the Boston Teachers Union's responses to that. Obviously, you can see here, not exactly very cleaned up. I also took the liberty of kind of linking these different areas of my exhibit to other exhibits if you want to know more. So I couldn't spend a whole lot of time talking about desegregation. So here I have linked it to Rachel's wonderful exhibit again. So I then moved on to the introduction of the Unified Facilities Plan and how it was influenced by desegregation, white flight, and how the union responded to that. Basically, enrollments were getting lowered. Outside contractors were brought in to basically give the city an idea of how to properly budget for the next school year. And the BTU took massive umbrage with that. And it kind of led to a very large, of course, you've already seen that one, and projected closings, a kind of an off again, on again battle against the school committee, the superintendent, the city council and city hall to try and both stop and start the plan again. I include here a lot of the grievances that the Boston Teachers Union took with this. And I think it's very interesting here is that I want to include more of an outsider's perspectives because the Boston Teachers Union did not have the greatest track record with racial diversity and desegregation. But here, one of their biggest complaints about the Unified Facilities Plan is how it was going to interfere with the ongoing desegregation efforts. Of course, so there's kind of an idea here. We include cartoons that the Boston Teachers Union keeps mocking the on again, off again battle. My favorite one is on the right, where the superintendent is complaining and bemoaning the fact to a therapist that he just can't seem to get the plan through, while members of the courts kind of keep rejecting and throwing out a large trash can full of the various unified facilities plans. You've seen some of this with Liz's as well, but I really tried to focus in on how the Boston Teachers Union saw this at this moment. You can see that parents and teachers are represented here as fighting for a quality education. against the school department, which is part of, which leads to, and their attempts to finally forge ahead and complete the unified facilities plan. That one's bad. I also included some poems and just kind of comedic incidents here, is that the Boston Teachers Union going into 1980 or 1981 was fairly certain they weren't gonna come out successful here, especially after the passing of Proposition 2.5. They include rough tidings from Roosevelt, which is their concern for students, which again, this concerns minority students. Something I definitely want to take a larger look into, because again, their track record at this time with desegregation was very poor. Of course, we have here the students and parents and teachers protesting in front of Faneuil Hall, within Faneuil Hall, in front of City Hall about the death of public education, how Boston was stripping schools of their budgets, and in the Boston Teachers Union eyes, kind of screwing everything up. And here we get to the ending where I want to transition more back into Eleanor's wonderful exhibit, that they knew at this point that the school closings would be followed by a wave of layoffs. Here, they don't take a large racial stance in this article, but moving from here, we can read back into Eleanor's, and we can hear the Black voices about navigating the layoffs of 1981. That is, I can't exit out of that, unfortunately. But that's basically the exhibit in a very short nutshell. It has heavy overlaps with other exhibits, which I wanted to use to my best advantage by being able to bring all these other exhibits together and show the ongoing and contemporary events happening in Boston about the Boston Teachers Union. That's it.
I'm checking out the comments here. Also, I see, so Richard Stutman's on the call, and quite a few articles he wrote. And I will say Richard's oral history, along with Bob Perlman's, were really very helpful, I think, for us to start understanding, and these will be in Maddie's exhibit down the line, sort of how this unified facilities plan played out, how these schools were sewed off. In Dorchester, around the corner from where I was living for a couple of years, you can visit the Latin Academy apartments. They look lovely. It's not a public good anymore, though, is it? So again, appreciate again how these oral histories come together, and we'll be building these into these exhibits. So we spent a lot of time in these 70s, 80s years, and of course a lot happened, but these records continue. We want to jump ahead. And so I'm thrilled now we're going to talk about the way the BTU responded to the UNS initiative. We have Yasmin Cater to talk about this. And this also draws in some really great oral histories. So, yeah.
Hello, I'm Yasmin Cater. So I'm a second year MS, Critical Ethnic and Community Studies major. And so when we were looking at running our blogs and exhibits, I was interested in like the topic of ethnic studies, not just because it's, you know, my major, but I also do want to go into education. So I'm always wanting to learn more about different ways to like foster an inclusive classroom. So to get to the UNS initiative, it was a bit of a long time getting there at first. So my process was kind of, so first I tried to plug into the archives, ethnic studies and culturally sustained pedagogies, which brought up nothing. So then I was like, okay, let me look up each of those words individually. And I got a lot of hits for culture. And originally I was thinking that I was going to look through, not necessarily a timeline, but just kind of how culturally sustained pedagogies and ethnic studies evolved throughout the decades in the Boston Union Teacher. But I quickly realized for a 6-week project that just was taking way too much time. So I think I got until the 80s, and then I was like, well, let me start looking in the 2000s. And in the 2000s, one thing I noticed a lot was a lot of mentions about school culture, classroom culture. And I met with Nick quite a few times, couldn't have done it without him. And we realized that there was a lot of legislature at this time that was affecting immigrant students, English language learners, English as a second language and immigrant students. And particularly one he brought up was the UNS initiative. And so the UNS initiative was passed in 2002, and it was to end bilingual education. So in my exhibit, I look at how the BTU responded to UNS, which was, I guess I'll just click through a little bit real quick. Kelly did mention 2001. My favorite line was, "Mr. UNS has never taught a day in his life." So they responded pretty quickly. A few months after it was passed, they had an anti-UNS rally. And Stutman is in there. There he is. And so the major points that kind of came up from this rally was that UNS, the person who wanted to pass this legislation, was just some Californian like millionaire businessman. He had no history in education, and there was no like hard research to this initiative to end bilingual education. There like no real benefits, and in fact there was a lot of research in the opposite, that bilingual and inclusive diverse education benefits students. We wrote quite a few articles, and then I did dedicate a page to Berta Baris because she wrote about this a few times and talked about it a few times. And also she has, I'm gonna go through my notes, I'm sorry. Sorry. So she's been outspoken and advocating for immigrant students and language learners since the 1980s. So this is a piece that she wrote, it was 2002. So this was 7 months after it passed. And then she wrote another article again in 2006, a few years later, reflecting back on it. And then we also included an oral history that she did with Betsy and Nick, where she talked about the initiative and how it affected her students. And then the next thing that I did was I put it into context. So around the same time was No Child Left Behind, which was also having like similarly negative effects for students that were English language learners or English as a second language immigrant students. And the BTU reacted to that as well. Just a little bit on that. And then, oh, sorry. Then, so a few years later in 2005 was House Bill HR 4437. So, so this one was, it's an anti-immigrant bill that was passed in the House but died in the Senate. So this was just, actually at the time, so in 2005, there were 10.3 million school-age children from immigrant families. So just seeing how that kind of was affecting immigrant students at this time. And then the impact of UNS was it got repealed and replaced with the Look Act. So just a key point for that was it basically repealed the UNS initiative, and then but that's basically it. I don't know that much about this.
Thank you so much, Esme. I really appreciate, and one, I'm so thrilled we have Berta's voice in there. And two, I think it's, this is really important history. It's recent, but it's still history. It's still very important. So last but not least, we have Grace Markovich, who's going to speak about her exhibit on teacher voices. And let me pull it up.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Grace Wergovich. I am a first-year student in the Accelerated History Master's Program, and I am a social studies student teacher at Randolph High. So, of course, I wanted to talk about teachers' voices. So this was quite rewarding since the members of the BTU shared such rich pieces, many of which showed just how opinionated teachers can be. So I really loved that. The Boston Union Teacher newspaper acted as a safe space for teachers to share their opinions. So my sources mostly came from the newspaper. So as you can see, I organized my project into 4 categories. So letters to the editor, teachers on teaching, teachers and poetry, and then teachers' advice on stress in the job. So I really love the letters to the editor because first of all, these are often overlooked in newspapers. So I loved drawing them out to your attention. And these really specifically showed just how passionate teachers were and how they were free to criticize and correct other articles in the newspaper, which, like I said, shows how this was a safe space for the members to share their opinions. So we see here a few examples of these letters to the editor. And then moving on to teachers on teaching. This section looks at the strategies and pedagogies that teachers shared with one another. So we have all these sorts of new result-based teaching methods that were just coming out at the time. And then, of course, connecting to today, we have the Teachers on Teaching podcast, which is a great resource. And then I have some extra resources here. And then teachers and poetry was my personal favorite because I actually decided to become a teacher based on a poem I read on the importance of teaching the next generation. So this one really touches my heart. And it just beautifully shows the teachers' experiences in a way that's both raw and descriptive and funny. These are hilarious. And then teachers' advice on stress. Sadly, as we know, teaching can often cause stress in the profession and burnout. So I really love to see the way teachers were using this newspaper as a space to share with one another ways to address that. So we have beating stress out, and these all have like lists of things you can do as a teacher to combat this unfortunate side to teaching. And then this was also a space where teachers could just vent. I could just scream. I mean, like, just that title tells you so much about the fact that this paper was let teachers do this. So I really appreciated that. So to me, as a future educator, it just made sense to draw out these teacher voices and to honor the past generation who dedicated their time to teaching the next generation. So thank you very much.
I don't think I even mentioned at the start that it is Teacher Appreciation Week. So what better way to end? And Grace, thank you so much for this. Thank you again. All of these students have worked so incredibly hard over a really condensed time frame to put these together. These are drafts. We welcome your comments. We welcome your suggestions. We welcome ideas for future exhibits and future explorations. One of the things I also love about all of these exhibits, and which the students have heard me say many times, is that they offer the opportunity to explore their entry points, places to dive into the collection. You like these poems, there's more to find. This particular union teacher issue, well, there's more that's covered here and here. These are all meant to sort of invitations into these collections to launch further explorations, further conversations. Now, I know we're coming up on 6 o'clock. I really appreciate you all making the time to stay here for all of this. I do want to make time for any questions or comments, particularly from BTU members who might want to react to what they've heard about their union. And that can be both here and on the chat. We can unmute as well. I'll stop the screen share here. Really appreciate all of the comments. And I'm going to bring our assembled guests back up to the screen here. So you all are back on screen on Zoom there. But the floor is open for questions, comments, reactions of any kind. Joan, you can unmute and we'll hear you, I believe.
It's so interesting to hear what the students gathered from the information that they had in front of them, and how strange it is to be sitting here as one of the activist women in the union who, believe me, never had her voice stifled. I thought that was so interesting, but it's true. the offices tended to be men. Though I was an officer, I was one of the vice presidents, I was on the executive board. The putting things in a context in a way that those of us that were very close to the to all of the tumult it's really it makes you think. It makes you think. So I really want to thank the young men and women that did this because they did a great job.
Thank you. Your oral history is one of the first we did, and there's so many links from it to other subjects and topics. So there'll be quite a few clips in these exhibits by the end of it for sure. Would you want to come up? Okay.
I just wanted to thank everybody. I taught for 35 years in Boston. My name is Jamie Frank, special educator. I just wanted to comment on what a complete job it is, because we were over here kind of conversing about, and yet we closed our doors and we taught. There's a wonderful children's book. It's called Teacher, the Geranium on the Windowsill Died and You Went on Teaching. It's wonderful that you were able to cycle all the way back to what happened then and how what's happening now. They're all connected. It's really delightful to see that you have this appreciation. We have a real appreciation of the Boston Teachers Union and the American Federation of Teachers, because it's not just about labor, it's about education. And we're proud to be members of those organizations because behind all of the gains that we got was the feeling that it benefited our students, it benefited our families, and it benefited us. And when you look at it, you think, well, how did we just go on? Because every day is a new problem. But it's very encouraging that you captured it and you continue to capture it. It's gratifying, and thank you for all your hard work.
I realize the audio would be such that those on Zoom can't hear, but Janie Frank was speaking about the sort of continuing to work through all of these challenges and also about the sort of degree to which being a member of the BTU and of the AFT is not just about labor, it's about education. Thank you for that. Well, as we come to the end, oh, Carolyn Goldstein. Bye. So Carolyn is being a good pedagogue and reminding us to answer our Director of Public History's question. How did we? How did we choose?
I'm curious. I mean, first of all, what a wonderful job. I was thrilled to see you all with these projects at the end of a long year. But I love how the topics all sort of intersect one another, and how there was a lot of I think sort of personal connection that you each had to your projects, and I really like that. Seems like you had a lot of freedom. But I'm interested because I talked to you when you were designing and choosing the platform and thinking both about how to teach and how to create a project. And Jane and I have collaborated on many a practicum project in the past, on a digital ones, but some digital ones. So I'm really interested in how you chose these topics and how did that go for you and for you?
Yeah, well, I'll say a little. So this is a question about how we chose these topics in the course. I'll say a little about how I structured it or did not in some cases. And then if students want to chime in, please do. So we were diving into this in a way sort of right at the moment that these collections were even becoming available online. And so we didn't totally know what was there in some cases. I hadn't gone through a full run of the Union Teacher yet. I had a chance to look at a bit of it. I did know the oral histories. And so the way we laid this out was we spent the first half of the class looking at other digital projects hearing from BTU folks, so Betsy, Michael McGuire, and Anne. I did want to note, Anne was one who gave a suggestion to us, and this gives you a sense of our process a little, that teachers in poetry would be a really good topic to look for in the union teacher, and I'm so glad Grace took it up. So we got to hear from Michael and Anne and from Betsy about some potential topics, places of interest. We also heard from other people in the course of emails and conversations about work that was going on, like Ari's, or about work we'd already done, like the sort of slideshow contract games. And so these were topics that we floated and talked about. But we also really did say, okay, I said, students, the archive's live now. Your first assignment is a blog post. Find something and tell us about it. And in Liz's case, you found that incredible cover. I heard a conversation, by the way. We have to figure out who the BTU cartoonist was in the early 1980s, because wow, those covers are amazing. But so this was a process where we had a few different sort of logics for thinking about exhibits. And then I sort of allowed students to take them and run. And in some cases, people said, I know exactly what I want to do and why. In other cases, they said, let's talk about it. And we had conversations that led to different exhibits. But it was definitely haphazard. It definitely required a lot of nimble thinking and creative thinking on the part of this incredible group of students. And so I'm so very grateful to them for taking on this challenge. And I don't know if anyone wants to add anything, but you're welcome to come up or add from your seats about process. Go ahead.
Oh, it's so short. It's so short. Yeah, I was just going to say that the process of doing the blog post was actually really helpful, because that was the first time that we had to sort of dive into the archives with intention. It wasn't just like browsing, which I think all of us could have done kind of forever and just sort of kept eddying around and around, but to dive in and then to sort of pick a thread and find something to talk about. And so for me, that process actually of doing the blog post was a helpful stepping stone to being like, okay, if you can see how these things together make a thread, what would be something that you could spend more time on? So that worked structurally.
So then once you each did a blog post, then what? Then you sort of reflect on whether that would be your thread for your exhibit? Or...
So yeah, then we had a collective share out of the blog posts. And I mean, did you want to say a little about that? Yeah.
So with me with my blog post was kind of about how in the past, it was on ethics studies again in Boston teacher. You really can't find much before, I think it was 2010. So that was kind of what I talked about my blog post, and then I reflected on, now there's so much information like on the websites, the Google sites on ethics studies. So that was what I talked about with that. And then, so when I was thinking about doing the exhibit, that's what was in my mind, is going back and seeing, like, putting in, where are they talking about cultural sustainability, which is where they talk about ethics studies, but in other words,
Yeah, and what we did, we shared out from our blog post, and then some students chose to build on those. Other folks went in different directions, and that's also when we started doing the technical side of the practicum. So starting to get our heads around WordPress, what we could do, what we couldn't do, what we still need to do, and using this platform, which we chose in part because it was accessible and easy, and in part because about 43% of the web is built on it. So for practical sort of skill building, this was a useful place to work.
Thank you.
Liz.
A little bit on the methodology too. One of the things that struck me when I was looking for a topic and finding these amazing cartoons is that the language in the Boston Union Teacher, especially language from Richard Stutman, from Kathy Kelly, from Ed Doherty, it's really supercharged. Like they are taking a stance. They really believe in something, and it's really black and white for them. And so in reading this, it really kind of energized me, like, oh, this is something important, something's going on. But also it is very, very one-sided. And so it inspired me to look for a lot of other sources outside of the Boston Union Teacher to get the full perspective. Because when I was looking at, oh, this Kevin White is like really not a great guy, and he's not. But when you read these articles, you would never know that they were fighting affirmative action unless you really, really dive deep, or that, teachers and parents of color were being completely left out of the conversation or steamrolled because they were
focusing on a different topic that they thought was unrelated. And so diving into this archive is really, really interesting, but it really points out that you can't just use one archive for your research. It's one piece of the puzzle, just to kind of like get you started, wet your whistle. Thanks, that's great.
Excellent. I see a hand over here. Annetta, come on up. I'm going to make you come up again.
Hi again, everybody. So another role I play here at the university is I'm the president of the professional staff union here on campus. And other than wanting to say, I hope the archive, I hope my sister workers in the archives are ready for like a whole bunch of unions going, can you do our stuff too? And Nick will have to make more and more class projects about this. I wanted to say this from the union perspective. My hat is really off to the BTU for taking this on. There is an aspect of unionism that is often a little bit protectionist and fearful about how are we going to be seen? Are people going to take us out of context? Are they really going to understand us? We don't want to show the skeletons in the closet. We don't want to talk about the times when we made really bad decisions and took bad stances. But you know, unions are human organizations. So of course we make mistakes. And of course we're part of the society in which we live. I think it's an extraordinarily powerful thing for the BTU to say, here's our history, good and bad. Let's learn from it. Let's learn the power that we have as workers. I mean, I'm in the Mass Teachers Association. I hear a lot from folks about we're public sector workers, we can't strike. My mom was a school teacher in the public schools in Massachusetts in the 70s. The first thing I remember is when she went on strike. And I'm like, I know it's illegal, but we have this incredible history of striking in Massachusetts. Let's not lose that. Let's not lose that sense of power and fight. And let's really think about what happens with power dynamics in the unions. What was sexism like? What is racism like within our unions? Because if we don't, as Jessica started us off saying, if we can't reflect on that honestly, we are never going to become better organizations. So huge kudos to the BTU for being willing to say, we're not afraid of sharing. We're not afraid of honestly taking a look at ourselves and letting other folks take a look at us as well. So thank you for that model.
Thank you, Annetta. People have heard me say this. It's been such a pleasure and a privilege to work on this project, and also very different than other conversations I've had in other contexts with other unions. Well, remain unnamed, of course, but it is not the norm, and it's so sort of inspiring and exciting. Absolutely. So we are coming up on 6. I wanted to give Betsy the last word, if you had, just to respond. No.
Really, just thank you. Thank you. It's very impressive, the whole display. Kind of amazing how something starts with this small conversation and 4 years later you're looking at this. So persist. I think that's the lesson.
It is. No, so as Betsy was saying, for those on the Zoom, you know, the level of sort of persistence here, we have to credit Betsy above all for imagining this, for getting it started, for bringing us all into it, and for giving us the opportunity to do this. And as I was saying, this is a launch. This is just the beginning. There's so much more to say, so many more ideas to explore, and we're excited to do that with you. So please be in touch, respond to those feedback and contact us forms. Find us afterwards if you're here, and thank you all again so much. Thanks, everyone.